Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Acme Comic Con.
Hello, 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 hello.
Testing 1, 2, 3. We're delighted to welcome Alan Martin to the show today. For anyone who doesn't know, Alan is the co-creator of Tank Girl, amongst other things. But I'm going to talk a little bit about Alan's background just to set the scene, and then we'll talk more specifics about Tank Girl as we go on with the conversation. So I'd just like to know, Alan, when you kind of started getting into comics and what kind of brought you into this world?
Well, my first experience of comics, like any kid that grew up in the 70s, was like we were just talking about Monster Fun, Whoopee, all of those sort of throwaway 2.5p comics that were on every newsstand. But the ones that I really remember, my dad was an engineer, and he brought home a box of Mad magazine that someone had just dumped under a stairwell in the place he worked, and that had a massive impact on me. I just couldn't quite fathom what it was that I had in my hands. And as I grew older, I kind of came to understand the satire in those comics, and that really sort of kicked me off in understanding comics in a different way. And also, back in those days, especially with British comics, there were no creators credited in the comic. It wasn't until 2000 AD came along in 77 that they actually, well 78, when they actually started putting who wrote it and who drew it onto the first page of the comic. But in Mad magazine, it was always credited, so I always knew who my favourite artists were, and so that really sort of involved me in the world of comics in a way that British comics didn't at that time. But then when I was 11 or 12, 2000 AD came out and sort of blew everyone's minds and changed the whole aspect of how I looked at comics again. So that was sort of my introduction into comics. I mean, I was always like a very sort of visual kid, like looking for new movies, new comics, new TV shows, whatever it was, especially if there was action involved or humour, then I'd be there sort of gobbling it up.
I mean, it's quite interesting you mentioned Mad, because they were famous for their movie parodies. And again, that was something quite different at the time compared to British comics, which tended to be a little bit more mainstream, I suppose. And I suppose Mad was a bit more, had a bit more edge to it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely. The one that I really remember is the Star Wars. It was Mort Drucker drew it, I think. That came out before the movie came out in Britain. And I read it like 20 times. I was just sort of obsessed with it, and I tried to redraw it and recreate my own version of it. And I think I was like 10 or 11 when that came out. And yeah, that really hit me.
And also something about that kind of storytelling technique, which is almost like throwing everything at the page. You know, it wasn't a traditional panel layout. And I suppose you could sort of see that in some of the early Tank Girl work as well, but how that was constructed was quite different from comics at the time.
I think we took a lot from that, those sort of shortcuts that you can fit a lot of exposition in one speech bubble, and then leave loads out in the next panel, or skip to the next day or the next week or the next year without any real explanation, and just assuming that people know the tropes you're already working with. That was something that we did subconsciously. We didn't know we were doing it, but that when we started working on Tank Girl, Jamie was a huge Mad magazine fan as well, and that's something that really sort of linked us. We had that language.
So if you're coming out of school, what is your kind of career sort of path? What was it you intended to do, and how did you kind of wind up working in comics, which is quite an unusual career choice to make?
I'd never intended to work in comics, because I didn't even know it was a job you could do. I just thought comics sort of the things that turned up in comic shop in newsagents. So the big key moment was when I was in maths class, and I'd been separated from another guy in the class. He'd been sent to the back, and I had to sit at the front because we'd been causing a disturbance, and we had to sit at a double table each by ourselves. And I think I was like 13, and they brought in a new kid. So this is down in Worthing on the south coast of England, and they brought in a new kid from Southport, near Liverpool, and they said, right, go and sit next to him. So they sat him next to me, and he started drawing on the front of his exercise book, and it was just incredible. He was like a really sort of refined comics draftsman at the age of 13 years old, and that was Philip Bond, who then suddenly just became my best friend. We started making comics I started like throwing ideas in. We started making comics for the school magazine, and through him I discovered that you can go to art college. So I was like, oh, that's the thing you can do. Like, so you don't have to go and be what your dad is, although Philip's dad was a comic artist. So I suddenly discovered that there was a world of art that was accessible to me, and I didn't have to go into a job. I could go to a place full of hippies and not do a lot. We got picked on a lot at school, and we started hanging out in the art room, and one of the art tutors sort of took pity on us, or maybe he just liked us, and he let us have the art room to ourselves every lunchtime. So we started this kind of art club, and never went out into the playground or the playing fields again, and just kind of like with the nerds who were on their way to art college. So we ended up at art college. Me and Philip went together. We spent 3 years just doing various courses, and we both ended up doing graphic design and illustration. And then we progressed onto a video and filmmaking course. And whilst we were doing that, there was a new influx below us. And in that, there was a new kid, and he could draw comics. And Philip and that kid, they both were just like drawn to each other. They were like magnets. And that was Jamie. So suddenly there was me, and there was Philip, and there was Jamie, and I was the kind of guy coming up with silly ideas and writing bits of scripts, and they were writing scripts but doing loads of artwork. So we created a fanzine that we kind of in a guerrilla style, we printed on the Star photocopier, started selling around the campus for 50p a copy, and also at that time, like one of the only comic conventions in the UK was Comic Con, not Comic Con, it was UCAC, the UK Comic Art Convention, which was on twice a year. There was one in London and one in Glasgow, and we used to go to that and sell our fanzine there. And within our fanzine, we had a one-page image of a pin-up. It just said "Tank Girl." It was Jamie drew a picture of a girl with a massive gun. I gave him a picture of a tank. He stuck the picture of the tank behind the girl, wrote "Tank Girl" on it, and that was it. We left it at that. And whilst we were at college, Brett Ewins, who was an artist on 2000 AD, came and did a lecture at Worthing Art College because he was friends. He'd gone to Goldsmiths Art College with the textiles tutor at Worthing Art College. And she'd invited him down, knowing that we were all really into comics. So we just like mobbed him and gave him our fanzines. And he was like, he seemed impressed, and he went away. Then we all left college. And then a year later, we got a message from Brett saying, I'm starting up a magazine called Deadline with Steve Dillon, another 2000 AD artist. And did we want to do some stuff for it? And Deadline was a kind of a mix of music interviews, culture interviews, and comics. And we said, yeah. And he said, do you want to do Tank Girl? And we were like, what do you mean? He said, that page in your fanzine, can you turn that into a full-blown comic strip? And so we said, yeah, we just sort of invented it out of that. And really, when that first image existed, there was nothing behind it whatsoever. It was a girl with a big gun and a picture of a tank. And so we had to add loads of stuff in. And at the time, it was really zeitgeisty. Australia was everywhere. The biggest TV show was Neighbours. The biggest film of the year was Crocodile Dundee. Mad Max was huge. So the setting of Australia for Tank Girl sort of emerged just out of just groping around in the darkness, trying to find stuff to fill in a backstory for this page of nothing that we created.
That's a brilliant origin story for a character.
Isn't it?
It's sort of make it up and see what happens, as you go. But I'm really interested in that, what the attitude was towards comics and art college. 'Cause I went to art college. When I went to art college, it was frowned upon. Eventually, I started my own comics course just in spite of that, at university as it became. So I just wondered, how do you think that you were kind of rebelling against that kind of traditional art school mentality when you were there?
I think by the time me and Philip especially were in our final years, I mean, we were there for 5 years. We were really sort of long in the tooth and should have left a long time ago. We didn't want to be doing what we were doing. Basically, they were showing us how to make video adverts for the Yeovil sheepskin shop and sort of corporate videos and things. But we wanted to be artists, and we wanted to be alternative, and we wanted to be weird. But there was absolutely no scope for that within the course whatsoever. So it all spilled over into what we were creating at home, or sort of in the bed sits that we were now living in. It really was. I don't know whether we were revolting against what the college was trying to teach us. We were just in the wrong place. But we met each other there, so it was the right place as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really interesting, the timing of it. So you mentioned that Brett and Steve had come out of 2000 AD, and as someone who was reading 2000 AD at the time and then saw Deadline, there was such a contrast between the two publications at that time. Now, 2000 AD originally started off with this kind of punk mentality, and it felt really edgy. By the time you're hitting 87, 88, 89, it kind of gone quite safe. And I think that's really what for me appealed to Deadline. It felt much more edgier, it felt much more current, and it felt much more in tune with me actually as a reader.
I think they'd started playing safe just to keep their print numbers rolling out. But with Deadline was bankrolled by Tom Astor, who is the grandson of Nancy Astor and the Astor Millions, who were the richest family in the UK in the 1920s. And he was friends with Brett, and he was a big comics fan. And Brett went to him with this proposal to start Deadline, and he was just up for it. And he's a bit of a playboy, so you kind of we'll have our own comic. So and that turned out to be Deadline, and within that framework, no one really knew what they were doing financially or otherwise. So there was it was just chaos. So we got away with being really experimental, and finally kind of almost self-destructive in what we were doing, because as Tank Girl evolved, we didn't like the way she was being pigeonholed, and that became sort of emblematic of the character, that we fought against the pigeonholing of her, and so it really, in the end, we were doing things that were really, really quite crazy, because we were trying to drive the numbers of sales down. We were trying, it was kind of like Malcolm McLaren. It was quite punk rock, and we were well into all of that chaos theory, and
I was going to ask about that collaboration, because it didn't seem like a traditional, you write the script, you pass it over to the artist and they go and draw it type of scenario. It seemed very, very fluid, it seemed anyway as a reader.
Yeah, well that's the way it's ended up now, is that I will write a traditional comic script and hand it to the artist. But back then, a lot of the time we would start a comic with only a very vague idea of where it was going to go, and we would have, usually, because it was a monthly, we'd leave it until the last week of the month, until we had like a couple of days left, and we'd go to the pub, we'd come up with like a bit of a stupid idea, and then we'd go back, sit down, and Jamie would just start drawing like an absolute bastard. I mean, I was astounded by what he could do. So he would be like penciling, inking. I would be blacking stuff in, putting electrotone on, hand lettering. But at the same time, you know, he'd be saying, "What's in the next panel?" And I'd be like, "Well, we've got to go." You know, a lot of the time it was just very intuitive. It was like, "Well, obviously, this happens," and we'd just kind of roll it out. And yeah, I mean, we could start a 10-page strip and not know what was happening per panel, and until we get to the very end, it was like, ta-da, that's the punchline, which would always kind of seem obvious to us, or we'd make it so obscure that it didn't matter. So it was, I mean, it was a very much an experimentation, and one of the things that really struck us at the time was, I think it was Yoko Ono was talking about what she loved about the 45 RPM 7-inch single format, was that it was so immediate. And when the Beatles made records, they'd have an idea, they'd write the song that evening or the next day, they'd go into the studio, and then in 2 weeks' time it would be on the shelves. And there was something about that immediacy of thought that really kind of hit the zeitgeist and tuned into the psyche of society as it was rolling out. And so I don't know whether they would have sold less or more had that not been the case. But we kind of loved that idea, that we could come up with an idea in the pub on a Friday night, write the comic and draw the comic over the weekend. One of us would get on the milk train first thing in the morning to take it to the printers, completely bypassing any editorial, and take it straight to the printers, give it to the printers, and at the end of the week it would be on the shelves in WH Smith's.
I mean, that's what people forget. It was actually a mainstream magazine, essentially, distribution-wise. So it was in every high street, it was in newsagents, it was across the country, and eventually across the world. I know it exported as well. I remember seeing it when I was on holiday one year. And when did you kind of sit up and realise that this was something?
I think it was quite immediate, really, because when initially Brett's character, Johnny Nemo, was meant to be the lead character of Deadline magazine. And Jamie delivered a cover for like a issue 2 or issue 3, and we finished the first strip, and we handed it in. This was all in good time because we were kind of eager to get like officially published the first time. And Tom and Brett and Steve saw it, and they said that's got to go on the cover of number 1. So Brett's stuff, you know, and fair dues to Brett, because like he saw that was what they should do, so that he let Jamie's cover be bumped up to issue 1. So we got the first issue cover, and that's what everyone talked about, like immediately, and lots of clauses. There's clause 28, and there was a lot of political agendas sort of latched onto it quite quickly, but also a lot of people felt that it was people just related to it in a way that they couldn't relate to comics before that, because of its immediacy and its stupidity and its recklessness.
I think that was interesting as far as cultural icons go. It came out of nowhere, and then it became so huge that suddenly you've got, you know, fashion labels want to be involved in it, you've got other movements want to get involved, you've got films wanting to be made from it, and you know, this kind of explosion. How did you kind of handle that as two creators who kind of were making it up as you went along? Did you find that a hindrance to you, all this kind of external noise coming in and all this kind of pressure to deliver things in different formats?
I think we never let the pressure build. We always would just approach it with the same sort of stoic stupidity that we'd started with. So we wouldn't think now we need to get professional. Now is the moment where, you know, where the reality kicks in. It never happened. So we continued to be as ludicrous as possible, or in fact even more so as it went on. Yeah.
And it's interesting that, you know, for me, I remember the summer of '95 quite well, because you had two films based on British comic characters coming out. And I do even remember the very first issue of SFX magazine, which is still going to this day, had Tank Girl on the cover of the launch issue. So it was huge, and it was everywhere, and it went over into mainstream media as well. I just want your feelings about the film and how it came about, and what you thought of the film personally.
Well, the film came about because after a couple of years of doing Deadline, we had enough material to make a graphic novel. So we didn't produce it as a graphic novel, because these stories, they were like 5 pages, 8 pages, 10 pages, maybe a 2-parter, but we had enough to fill up a whole book. And a guy called Ravi Merchandani, who worked for Penguin.
Good afternoon, Acme Comic Con fans. We're having a fantastic day with us today. Just to let you know that the Talkie Toaster meets Holly and Doug panel talk is happening on the main stage in the Hall 3. That's where Hattie Gingrich and Naylor.
This is where all the Red Dwarf fans bail out.
Happening on the main stage in Hall 3. If you want to listen to that on the main stage, head there now. Thank you.
Or this talk, maybe. I don't know.
Right, where was I? I've completely lost my thread.
Yeah, so I think we're just...
the movie.
Yes.
The movie, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So we did the book with Penguin. So book 1, it wasn't called book 1, it was just called Tank Girl. They compiled everything we'd done up to that point, put the book out, and it sold really well. And in America, someone picked it up who was the daughter of the producer and director Rachel Talalay, who worked with John Waters on the movie Cry Baby, Hairspray. She was a well-known alternative producer. I think she just produced Nightmare on Elm Street 4 as well, or something, like The Final Nightmare, or I can't remember the name of it. And she was gifted the book for Christmas by her, I think her stepdaughter, and she saw it and she said, I've got to make a film out of this. So she started touting it around Hollywood, and literally everyone just slammed the door in her face. But like nobody could see the potential of it. I mean, maybe they could get a bit of the gist. Yeah, a girl in a tank might look quite good, but no one could really see what the substance of it was. And she really persisted. She went around for like a couple of years until she actually got some traction with it. And famously, Steven Spielberg turned it down, saying it was too hip for him. So we made a T-shirt.
What does he know?
We made that T-shirt that said "Too hip for Spielberg," and we sold loads of them. And like we just made a joke out of the fact that, you know, Steven Spielberg looked at our comic and said, "No, I'm not touching that." Eventually, she got to MGM, and Alan Ladd Jr. Alan Ladd was a big cowboy star. He was in the film Shane. Alan Ladd Jr., his son, was a Hollywood mogul, and he was the guy who greenlit Star Wars, the first Star Wars film. And he saw it, and she got to approach him, and he greenlit the project. And it was given a budget. It was assigned a writer. It was assigned blah blah blah, and it started to roll on. And You know, me and Jamie were taken out to Hollywood and wined and dined and got to hang out there and just took it all a bit satirically, I think is the word. We weren't that convinced it was going to work from the offset. Then we saw the script and we were like, oh dear. But then, you know, we saw some of the production design. Jamie was involved with a good amount of the design, but the costume designer, Ariane Phillips, she was fantastic. I mean, Laurie looked great as well. You know, there was a lot of people involved in it who made it look brilliant, but that we had a lot of issues with the script, a lot of which we just couldn't iron out. And eventually the movie came out, and I just distanced myself from it. Jamie went to I didn't even go to the premiere. Jamie went to the premiere where his girlfriend at the time almost got him killed by Ice-T's entourage for flapping her eyelashes at the wrong person. But I was just like, I'm just so glad we didn't go there, because like there was no rapturous applause at the end of it or anything. It was, everyone was a bit puzzled by the delivery of the movie. They didn't really get what had happened to the comic and how it had transferred into this other world. And I kind of walked away from the whole thing at that point. I was with my now wife. You know, we didn't get that well paid for the rights, but we got enough to live off for a few years. We bought a Mark I 1970s transit camper van, and we just drove around the British Isles for a year and didn't talk to anybody. And eventually, sort of, we came back to realising that after 10 years that there was still something there to use, and there were still people there that wanted more. But and this is the point about the film, is it's a double-edged sword in that it did destroy the comic. It destroyed Deadline magazine. It destroyed mine and Jamie's career at that point. And it took a while. But Jamie, you know, his visual talent's just like second to none. I mean, it didn't. He struggled to sort of find his feet again, and didn't really until he became friends after 10 years of being Damon's enemy, became like his friend and created Gorillas. But for me, it took a dozen years to come back to it. But at that point, I discovered that a lot of people had rediscovered the comics through the film, and that's the double edge. You know, that was that was like the surprise gift at the bottom of the rubbish bag. That was there's more people here who want to know more about Tango. They want to read more stupid stories. So the reinvention of it all started to kick in.
I think that is really interesting, because I think for me the film was maybe too ahead of its time in a way. I mean, at that time there wasn't a lot of other films based on comic strips even. You know, now it's pretty common, and now you could do different things with the effects, and you know, you might have treated it a different way. But for me, maybe it was just too soon for it, you know.
Yeah, maybe it's still too soon for it.
But I am fascinated about that kind of what happened next, and coming out of that, and how you kind of pick the momentum back up, and how you get back into, you know, creating Tank Girl for arguably for another generation now.
Yeah.
That's kind of fascinating as well, you know, because there's a lot of baggage comes with, you know, Hollywood and, you know, filmmaking.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, like you say, just want out of it completely. So what would you say was the creative reasons for it, and where would you say you started to look for the next, for example, creator to work with?
Well, initially I hadn't even thought of writing any more material, but I was approached by Titan, and they said, you know, all of this stuff's out of print, and a lot of it hasn't even been printed. So books 1, 2 and 3, like the Penguin book and its successors, just weren't available anymore. And we were still within 10 years of 5 or 6 years of the movie coming out. And they said, do you want to, remaster this stuff, or just get it out again for a new audience, or just fill that gap, because we think that Tank Girl is like an iconic British comic character. And so I just said, yeah, okay. And they said, well, what do you want to do? So we reformatted the original books, and I said, I'll write some new stuff to put in the front. So basically, I wrote a couple of comic scripts that were supposedly lost. They were kind of that no one had seen them and they never got made. But that's complete bullshit. They were things that I just made up just to put in the front as a lovely new extra, and a bit of extra material that can be generated without having to pay for new artwork. So I just wrote 2 scripts, and as I was writing them, I was thinking, I actually quite like doing this, and it's not difficult as I thought it was going to be. It's not as painful as I thought it was going to be. So this is about 2000, 2001, and at that point I thought, okay, I'll just start writing a few bits and bobs, which I did, and I published a few things that I just sold through eBay, like limited edition runs of my own books of just text, like 500 copies printed off of a home printer.
Is that a precursor to Kickstarter?
Yeah, for sure. And then Titan came to me and said, do you want to do some new stuff? So at that point, I had Jamie was on board, Philip was on board, and Steve Dillon's younger brother, Glyn Dillon, was on board. And unfortunately, contracts seemed to drag on for a while, and we didn't get signed up. And eventually, Jamie's Gorillas just went so berserk that he had no time to put in the effort that he said he could, and we missed the boat. And so I took it from Titan to IDW in San Diego, and Ashley Wood had his own imprint with IDW, 3A Comics, and he said, I want to draw the new series of Tank Girl. So I already had the scripts written, and they weren't written for Ashley, and I didn't really know Ashley Wood's work. I mean, there's a really different style from what I was used to doing with Philip and Jamie, who are much more cartoony, where Ashley's expression is very kinetic and graphic and scratchy. And so in a way, it sort of, I would have liked to have had time to rewrite it, but instead I just gave him the scripts that were written for Jamie and Philip, and Ashley did the first issue of the Gifting, Tank Girl: The Gifting, which came out in 2007. And then I collected up everything that I'd written as sort of prose text and put out a text novel called Armadillo. And then we were off, and now we are, my maths brain's not kicking in, 3, 10, however many years it is since 2007, 17 years later, we've had a almost continuous run of new material. Whereas the initial run that me and Jamie did, it lasted 6.5 years. So, it's 3 times the amount of span of time since we brought it back.
I think what strikes me about it now that it's come back is maybe tapping into some of your background in design, and how the whole book is designed and how the whole look is designed. I think some of the artists you've worked with they're maybe tackling it in a slightly different way from the way Jamie would have drawn it, or Philip Bond as well. And do you just let the artist get on with it, or are you quite involved in that process on a day-to-day basis in the new version of Tank Girl?
It depends on the artist, I think. I like a certain amount of irrelevant detail in panels, just because that's what people kind of look for in Tank Girl. What I look for in Tank Girl is to find the Easter eggs and find the sort of cultural dross that's kind of swept up on the sides of the panels, and so some artists you need to add more into the script and give more direction. Some, I mean, Brett, for instance, my scripts for Brett are very basic. They're just, you know, and he'll just chuck stuff in there, and I can trust him to kind of like get that balance right, where he'll just hit it right and give you enough to sort of feel like you can read the story, but you can, you know, find the surprises and feel connected to what's written on the guy's t-shirt, or all that stuff.
Because it's not a traditional type of comic, so finding those artists must be quite a challenge, actually.
It is. It's few and far between where I see an artist and I think, oh, yeah, this guy could do it. And you know, I would really love to find a female artist. And I have been searching, and we almost did one a couple of years ago, but unfortunately COVID sort of crashed down on us and destroyed an entire series. But it's hard. It's did that feel, and it's not, you know, it's not, oh, do they look like Jamie? It's like, can I just envisage that filling the page with what I need and what readers not expect but would relate to.
I mean, just before we throw over to any questions in the audience, just curious to see where you see this going next and what your future plans are for the character and beyond that as well.
Well, my future plans are just to, I think, write more prose novels, so more text basically, because I've got more control over as and when it can come out. I have just signed a contract for another series to come out next year, so there will be more Tango material next year. Exactly who's going to be drawing it and what it's going to be about is still up in the air. I mean, I'm just waiting to see the outcome of American election to kind of get the flavour of where we're going to be in next year. There's definitely going to be more material coming out. But also the movie, because we sold the rights, Margot Robbie, her production company Lucky Chap optioned that. As far as I know, they optioned it. This is the thing, MGM haven't told me anything about any of it. We got literally no contact whatsoever and no reply to any time we tried to contact them. Lucky Chap optioned it in 2019. That was now 5 years ago. And there was lots of talk about who was going to play the character, who was going to write it, who was going to direct it. And a couple of years ago, MGM was bought by Amazon. So MGM is no longer an entity unto itself, it is now under the Amazon umbrella. And the last I heard, and this is all just through on the grapevine, they don't actually tell us, it was with Amazon Animation. So
that kind of makes sense.
It does make sense, but that was like 2 years ago. I mean, it could be, they might be turning it into a sports program or something. I don't know what, it could be anything.
It could work really well as an animation and also as a series maybe as well, because the problem with a lot of comics to film adaptations is there's too much to do in 2.5 hours.
Yeah, but the other thing with Tango and the original movie is what drove the story. And within our original comics, the entire underlying premise is usually completely stupid, over which we layer a bit of pathos and then more stupid jokes. But with the Tango movie, the first one, they started with quite a serious premise, like an abduction of a child, all of her friends being annihilated, she wants revenge, but there was nothing silly. So I think that was fundamentally one thing that didn't work with that movie. But trying to make a whole movie out of something that's hinging on whose turn is it to make the tea, it's very difficult to engage an audience for like an hour and 3/4 on such a whimsical, stupid idea. So, really, I think like a 25-minute show is the home of where Tank Girl should be.
Absolutely. Let's hope that. Fingers crossed that happens, because it sounds like an amazing opportunity. So,
well, opportunity for someone, not for me.
Okay, I'd just like to see if there's anyone in the audience has any questions they want to ask Alan about anything that we've discussed today, or anything we've not discussed. Yes.
Well, it's quite difficult because Jamie now lives in Normandy with his wife, and Philip lives in Hollywood, and I live in Berwick-upon-Tweed. So it's very sporadic. I might see Jamie or I might see Philip, but actually all three of us getting together, I can't remember even the last time that happened. It's got to be over a decade ago, which is a real shame. But this is, life takes you all in different directions.
Any other questions from the audience?
Oh, I just mentioned that the movie
Yep.
is getting a Blu-ray release in Britain through Eureka. And I think it was scheduled to come out in October, but I think it's now coming out like mid-November. So it's like a prestigious Blu-ray release of the original movie. It comes with a 60-page book, and by some freak accident, they've let me write the intro to the book. That it was well vetted, but and it's got a lovely piece of new artwork on the cover from Greg Staples. So
Okay,
it's a nice package. But they've really great guys who put it together.
And you said that's October.
It was October,
Yeah.
but I think wranglings with MGM have kind of punted it onto mid-November. I
Okay.
think, yeah. But it's available from the Eureka site, and also you can get it on Amazon and stuff as well. But there's only I think they've done 2,000 copies.
Right. Okay.
But I think they will do like a sort of generic release, but the box set.
Right.
Yeah,
Sounds
we'll sell it
fantastic, actually. So anyone who's not ever seen the film, an ideal opportunity, and also to read an amazing new introduction to the film written by Alan himself. Any more questions before we wrap this one up?
And I just plug my box set that's coming
absolutely,
out as
absolutely, yes.
So another thing that was meant to come out in October but is now coming out in November is the Tank Girl trilogy box set by me and Brett Parson, which consists of Two Girls, One Tank, Tank Girl Gold, and World War Tank Girl, which is all one big story arc. And it's coming out in a nice slipcase edition, and Titan are doing a direct market version as well with a different variant cover. So, and expect to see more of these box sets as well, because they're looking really good. So we're going to be collecting a lot of past material and showing it in a new light.
Can we pre-order that? Is it from Titan or IDW?
Yes, you should be able to pre-order the mass market one through anywhere like Amazon or Barnes and Noble or wherever you are, or even WA Smith's. But the direct market one, obviously, for those who don't know, the direct market is direct to the comics buyers. So it's comic stores only, online comic stores, Forbidden Planet. And then you can get a limited edition cover on that one.
Well, I'll definitely be putting an order in for that. Also, if you're not aware, Alan has a table here today, so please drop by his table.
3 water pistols.
3 water pistols, yes. I can
What more can we
attest to that. And some amazing other merchandise, badges.
Starsky and Hutch badges.
Yeah, very good badges, I have to say, very good badges. So please drop by Alan's table, have a chat with him and see what else is available on the table, and very much looking forward to seeing what comes next. So thanks very much for your time, Alan, today.
Thank you. Cheers.